The mafia boss's flight was canceled until he saw the single mom crying with her kids. In the parking, the blizzard outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Fairgrove Regional Airport was not merely weather, it was a wall of white violence, a chaotic swirling of ice and wind that had grounded everything with wings for a 300-mile radius. Dario Moretti stood near the first-class lounge window, his reflection ghostly against the dark glass. He was a man who commanded rooms simply by entering them, a man whose time was valued in millions and whose patience was non-existent. He adjusted the cuff of his bespoke Italian suit, his dark eyes narrowing as he watched the ground crew retreat from the tarmac. The red text on the departure board behind him had flickered from delayed to canceled 10 minutes ago. He was stuck. In his world, being stuck was dangerous. Motion was survival. Static targets were dead targets. But nature, it seemed, did not care about the hierarchy of the East Coast underworld. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number. It rang once before being answered. "Boss," the voice on the other end said, tense and alert. "The jet is grounded," Dario said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that carried no trace of the frustration burning in his chest. "The roads to the city are already icing over. I am not spending the night in this terminal." "I have the SUV en route, sir," his driver, Enzo, replied. "But traffic is gridlocked at the arrival gate. It might take me 20 minutes to get to the VIP curb." Dario exhaled, a sharp sound through his nose. "Meet me in the short-term parking garage on the north side. It will be empty. I will walk." "Understood. 10 minutes." Dario hung up. He signaled to his single bodyguard, a silent shadow named Luca, and they exited the lounge. The terminal was a sea of stranded misery. Families slept on piles of luggage, businessmen shouted into phones, and the air smelled of stale coffee and damp wool. Dario moved through them like a shark cutting through a school of dull, slow fish. People parted for him without knowing why. They simply sensed the predatory grace in his walk, the aura of a man who was not to be touched. They exited the terminal and crossed the sky bridge into the parking garage. The temperature dropped 20 degrees instantly. The concrete structure was a wind tunnel, channeling the freezing air and swirling snow that drifted in through the open sides. It was dim, illuminated by flickering sodium lights that cast long, sickly orange shadows. Dario buttoned his cashmere coat, his leather gloves tightening into fists. He hated the cold. It reminded him of things he had spent 2 decades trying to forget. "Enzo is 5 minutes out," Luca said, scanning the empty rows of concrete. Dario nodded and leaned against a concrete pillar, lighting a cigarette to dull the biting edge of the wind. It was quiet here, away from the chaos of the terminal. Then he heard it. It was a sound that cut through the low hum of the wind, a jagged, wet sound, sobbing. Dario did not move at first. He was not a man prone to charity. In his line of work, weakness was a trap, and other people's desperation was usually a ploy. But the sound persisted, desperate and muffled, coming from the far corner of the row, against his better judgment. He turned his head. Parked under a flickering light was a minivan that had seen better decades. The beige paint was peeling, one tire was dangerously low, and the rear bumper was held on by silver duct tape. It was the kind of vehicle that screamed struggle. Through the driver's side window, he saw the woman. She was slumped over the steering wheel, her forehead resting on her arms, her shoulders shaking violently with each sob. She wore a thin coat that looked wholly inadequate for a storm of this magnitude. Dario took a drag of his cigarette, intending to look away. It was none of his business. Then he saw the movement in the back seat. 2 small faces were pressed against the glass. A boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, and a girl who looked no older than 4. They were huddled together under a thin fleece blanket. The boy had unbuckled his seatbelt and was leaning forward, reaching a small hand between the front seats to pat his mother's shaking shoulder. The boy's face was pale, his lips trembling, but his eyes were dry. He was trying to be brave. He was trying to take care of her. Dario froze. The ash from his cigarette fell unnoticed to the oil-stained concrete. That gesture, the The small hand on the shoulder, the terrified bravery in the boy's eyes, struck a chord deep within Dario's chest, vibrating against a memory he had buried under money and blood long ago. He remembered being that boy. He remembered the cold. He remembered the sound of a mother who had no options left. "Sir?" Luca stepped forward, noticing Dario's distraction. Dario dropped the cigarette and crushed it beneath his polished Oxford shoe. "Wait here. Boss, we don't know who—" "Wait here," Dario repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. He walked across the concrete, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. As he approached the van, he saw the woman freeze. She lifted her head, her eyes wide and red-rimmed, locking onto him in the rear-view mirror. Terror washed over her face. She scrambled to wipe her eyes, fumbling for the door lock, but her hands were shaking so badly she missed the button twice. Dario stopped 3 feet from the driver's door. He kept his hands visible, out of his pockets. "You are going to freeze to death out here," he said. His voice was not kind, but it was not cruel. It was simply a statement of fact. The window rolled down 2 inches, a manual crank that squeaked in the cold. "I'm fine," the woman said. Her voice was brittle, cracking under the weight of her tears. "We're fine. Please go away." Dario looked at the children in the back. The little girl was asleep, or maybe just lethargic from the cold. The boy stared at Dario with a mixture of defiance and fear. "The temperature is dropping," Dario said, shifting his gaze back to the woman. She was beautiful in a wrecked, exhausted way. Dark curls escaped a messy bun, framing a face that was pale with stress. Her eyes were a striking, clear hazel, currently swimming in panic. "Your car is not running. I'm waiting for someone." She lied. She was a terrible liar. "You are out of gas," Dario observed, nodding toward the dashboard where the needle lay dead flat against the empty mark. "And judging by the fact that you are crying in a parking garage at 3 in the afternoon, you have nowhere to go." Her chin went up. It was a spark of pride that he respected. "I said we are fine. My husband is on his way." "No, he isn't," Dario said softly. "If you had a husband coming, you wouldn't be looking at me like I'm the Grim Reaper. And that boy wouldn't be trying to keep you from falling apart." The woman flinched as if he had slapped her. She looked back at her son, pain twisting her features. "Look, mister, I don't have any money. I don't have a phone battery left. Just leave us alone." "I don't want your money," Dario said. He pulled a heavy leather wallet from his inside pocket. She recoiled, pressing herself against the door, likely expecting a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a business card. It was heavy, black cardstock with gold embossing, simple. Dario Moretti, investor. He slid it through the crack in the window. "My name is Dario. My driver is 2 minutes away. I have a private lodge about 40 minutes north of here. It has heat, food, and beds." She stared at the card, then at him. "You're insane. You think I'm getting in a car with a stranger? I think you have 2 children who are turning blue," Dario said, his tone hardening slightly. "And I think the hotels in Fairgrove have been booked solid for hours because of the storm. You can stay in this tin can and risk hypothermia, or you can accept a kindness from a man who has nothing to gain from it." "Why?" she whispered, searching his face. "Why would you help us?" Dario looked past her, at the boy in the back seat who was breathing on his hands to warm them. "Because the storm isn't going to break until morning." She hesitated. He could see the war inside her, the primal instinct to protect her children from a stranger versus the primal instinct to protect them from the elements. I ran away," she blurted out, the confession spilling over before she could stop it. She looked horrified that she had said it. "I can't. If anyone finds us—" Dario's expression did not change. He had sensed the fugitive energy on her from the moment he walked up. "No one will find you where I am going. My property is gated and secure. You have my word." She looked at her hands, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles were white. Then she looked at the kids. The little girl coughed, a dry, rattling sound. That broke her. "Okay," she whispered, closing her eyes. "Okay, but if you try anything, I swear to God—" "You won't need to swear to anyone," Dario said. He turned and signaled to Luca. "Gather their bags." The drive to the lodge was silent. The woman, who had introduced herself as Elena, sat in the back of the massive black SUV with her children. The heat in the vehicle was set to high, and slowly, the color began to return to their faces. Dario sat in the front passenger seat, staring out at the blinding white of the headlights cutting through the snow. He wondered what he was doing. He was the head of the Moretti crime family. He did not pick up strays. He did not invite liabilities into his sanctuary, and yet the memory of the boy's hand on her shoulder kept playing in his mind. They arrived at the lodge an hour later. The storm had worsened, slowing their pace, but the vehicle handled the mountain roads with ease. The lodge was a sprawling structure of dark timber and stone, hidden deep within a forest of pines that were now heavy with snow. When Enzo pulled up to the main entrance, the warm glow of the exterior lights felt like a beacon. "Come," Dario said, opening the back door. Elena stepped out, carrying the sleeping girl. Sophie, the boy, Leo, scrambled out after her, clutching a worn backpack. They looked up at the house with wide, disbelief-filled eyes. To them, it must have looked like a palace. Inside, the lodge was immaculate. A fire was already roaring in the massive stone hearth in the great room. Dario had texted the staff ahead. The air smelled of cedar and wood smoke. "Enzo, show them to the guest wing," Dario ordered, removing his coat. "And have the kitchen bring food, something simple, soup, grilled cheese, whatever children eat." Elena stood in the center of the foyer, hugging Sophie to her chest, looking terrified to touch anything. Her boots were worn and wet, leaving small dark marks on the slate floor. She looked down at them, mortified. "I'm sorry about the floor," she stammered. "It is stone." "Elena," Dario said, his voice calmer now that they were inside. "It wipes clean. Go, get warm." 2 hours later, the lodge was quiet. The storm howled against the glass, a distant monster that could no longer reach them. Dario sat in the great room, a crystal tumbler of bourbon resting on the arm of his leather chair. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. He had changed out of his suit into a dark sweater and trousers, though he still looked formal, contained. He heard soft footsteps on the stairs. Elena appeared in the doorway. She had showered and changed into the spare clothes the housekeeper had found, a soft cashmere jumper and leggings that were slightly too big for her. She looked younger now, without the grime of the road and the immediate panic in her eyes, but the wariness remained. "They're asleep?" Dario asked, not turning his head. "Out like lights," she said softly, stepping into the room. "Leo ate 3 sandwiches. Thank you. I don't know how to thank you." "Sit," Dario said, gesturing to the armchair opposite him. "There is wine on the table. It breathes well." Elena hesitated, then moved to the chair. She poured a small amount of the dark red wine into a glass and sat on the edge of the cushion, her posture rigid. "This place," she started, looking around at the high beams and the art on the walls. "It's incredible. Who are you? Dario? You said investor, but—" "I invest in many things," Dario said, taking a sip of his bourbon. "Real estate, shipping, logistics." It was the standard lie, delivered with practiced ease. "And you, Elena? Who are you running from?" She froze, the glass halfway to her lips. She lowered it slowly. "I didn't say I was running from a person. You said you fled. You said you were afraid of being found, and you have bruises on your wrist that you are trying very hard to hide with that sweater sleeve." Elena instinctively pulled her sleeve down over her hand. She looked into the fire, her jaw tightening. "His name is Mark. He wasn't always like this, but last year, he changed. He got involved with people, bad people. He started drinking, then he started hitting." Dario looked at her profile. He knew the type, men who felt small, so they used their fists to make themselves feel big. He despised them. "I left while he was at work," she whispered. "I packed the kids and just drove. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't let Leo see it happen one more time." "You did the right thing," Dario said. His voice was low, vibrating with a certainty that made her look up. "I have no money," she confessed, tears pricking her eyes again. "I have no job. I have a broken-down van and 2 kids who deserve better than a mother who is crying in a parking garage." "You are not crying in a parking garage," Dario corrected her. "You're drinking a $2,000 bottle of wine in front of a fire. Perspective is important." A small, watery laugh escaped her lips. It was a beautiful sound, surprising both of them. "Is it really $2,000? Give or take." She took a sip, her eyes widening. "Okay, that explains why it tastes like velvet." They sat in silence for a long time. It wasn't the awkward silence of strangers, but a heavy, charged silence. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. The air felt thinner, tighter. "Why did you help me?" she asked again, turning to face him fully. You're intense. Dario, you're scary. Honestly. But you looked at Leo like I knew what he was feeling." Dario finished. He set his glass down and stood up. He moved toward the fireplace to add a log, the movement fluid and powerful. He stood near her chair, the heat of the fire radiating between them. He looked down at her. She looked up, her hazel eyes searching his face, looking for the monster she expected him to be. "I was a boy once," Dario said, his voice rougher than intended. "And I had a mother who cried." Elena's breath hitched. She stood up slowly, drawn by a magnetic pull she didn't understand. She was close to him now, close enough to smell the sandalwood and tobacco that clung to him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "Thank you," she whispered. She reached out, her hand hovering for a second before she touched his arm. It was a light touch, barely there, but it sent a shockwave through Dario's system that nearly staggered him. It had been years since a woman had touched him without an agenda, without a price tag, without fear. He looked down at her hand, then up to her eyes. The space between them seemed to vanish, without thinking. Dario raised his hand. He brushed a stray curl of dark hair away from her cheek. His fingers grazed her skin, soft, warm, alive. Elena stopped breathing. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. His touch was gentle, terrifyingly gentle for a man who looked like he could crush stone. She saw a flash of something raw in his eyes, a hunger, a loneliness that mirrored her own. For a second, she thought he might kiss her. For a second, she wanted him to. Then, the mask slammed back into place. Dario pulled his hand away as if he had been burned. He stepped back, putting distance between them, his face returning to the cold marble mask of the boss. "It is late," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth from a moment ago. "You should sleep. The children will wake early." Elena blinked, the spell broken. She felt a flush of embarrassment rise up her neck. "Right, yeah, of course." She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "Good night, Dario." "Good night, Elena." She turned and hurried out of the room, her footsteps fading down the hallway. Dario remained by the fireplace. He stared into the flames, his hand still tingling where he had touched her skin. He reached for his cigarettes but stopped. He didn't want the smoke. He felt a strange, unfamiliar ache in his chest. It was dangerous. It was soft. And in his world, softness was the thing that got you killed. He turned off the lights, plunging the room into darkness, but the warmth of her presence lingered in the air like a ghost. The morning light that filtered through the heavy velvet curtains of the master suite was gray and muted, filtered through a thick layer of ice that had coated the glass overnight. Dario Moretti woke instantly, his internal clock set to a rhythm of vigilance that 20 years of underworld warfare had drilled into his bones. Usually, he wakes to silence. The lodge was staffed by ghosts, servants who moved unseen, leaving coffee on a tray and vanishing before he opened his eyes. Today, however, he woke to the smell of bacon. It was a thick, savory scent that drifted under the heavy oak door, accompanied by the faint, high-pitched giggle of a child. Dario lay still for a moment, staring at the exposed wooden beams of the ceiling. For a split second, disorientation gripped him. He was Dario Moretti. He lived alone. He traveled alone. Then the memory of the parking garage returned, the woman, the tears. The boy's hand on her shoulder. He sat up, rubbing a hand over his face. The stubble on his jaw scratched against his palm. He felt a strange heaviness in his chest, a pressure that wasn't quite anxiety but sat uncomfortably close to it. He swung his legs out of bed and dressed quickly, trading his silk pajamas for dark jeans and a charcoal cashmere sweater. He did not arm himself with his usual shoulder holster. In this house, with these guests, it felt like an unnecessary escalation. When he walked into the kitchen, the scene that greeted him was so aggressively domestic it almost stopped him in the doorway. Elena was standing at the massive industrial range, wielding a spatula like a weapon of war. She was wearing the same oversized clothes from the night before, her hair tied up in a messy knot that threatened to collapse at any moment. Leo was sitting at the island counter, his legs swinging, watching a cartoon on a tablet that Enzo must have provided. Sophie was on the floor, coloring in a sketchbook with intense concentration. The kitchen, usually a sterile place of stainless steel and silence, felt alive. "Flip it, Mom, it is burning," Leo advised, pointing a fork at the pan. "I am not burning it, I am caramelizing it," Elena retorted, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. She turned to grab the plate and froze when she saw Dario standing in the doorway. The spatula wavered in her hand. The easy warmth on her face vanished, replaced by that familiar, guarded tension. "Oh," she said, her voice breathless. "Good morning. I hope you don't mind. The staff. I didn't want to bother them and the kids were starving, so I found the pantry." Dario stepped into the room. Sophie looked up and beamed at him, waving a purple crayon. Leo went still, watching him with wary eyes. "The kitchen is yours," Dario said, his voice rough with sleep. "You do not need to ask for permission to feed your children." Elena relaxed, her shoulders dropping an inch. "There is coffee. It is fresh, and, well, there are pancakes, if you eat that sort of thing." Dario Moretti did not eat pancakes. He drank black espresso and ate protein, but he looked at the stack on the plate, lopsided and drenched in syrup, and then at the hopeful look Sophie was giving him. "I could eat," he said. He sat at the island, 2 stools away from Leo. Elena placed a mug of black coffee in front of him and a plate with 2 pancakes. She moved with nervous energy, wiping the counter, checking the stove, keeping her hands busy. "The storm?" she asked without looking at him. "Worse," Dario replied, taking a sip of the coffee. It was good, better than what his staff made, though he would never tell them that. "The roads are completely impassable. The local news says the plows have been pulled off the roads until visibility improves." Elena gripped the edge of the counter. "So we are stuck." "We are safe," Dario corrected. "There is a difference." He watched her as he ate. She was a mother first, a woman second. Every move she made was triangulated around the children, checking Sophie's milk cup, wiping syrup off Leo's chin. It was a dance of affection he had never witnessed up close. His own childhood had been a series of cold rooms and nannies who were paid to be indifferent. After breakfast, Dario retreated to his study. The walls were lined with books he had actually read and files that detailed the movement of millions of dollars in illicit cargo. He sat at his desk and picked up the landline. "It is Moretti," he said when his second-in-command answered. "Boss, we are rescheduling the meeting in Chicago for Tuesday." The voice on the other end said, "Hopefully the weather will break by then." Dario looked out the window. The snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets, erasing the world outside. He thought of the laughter in the kitchen. He thought of the silence that usually awaited him in his penthouse in the city. "Cancel it," Dario said. There was a pause on the line. "Cancel the Chicago meeting, sir. The union contract is—" "I said cancel it," Dario interrupted, his voice dropping an octave. "Cancel the flight. Cancel the hotel. Tell them I have a family emergency." Family emergency? The confusion was palpable. Dario Moretti did not have a family. "Indefinitely," Dario said. "Do not call me unless the building is burning down." He hung up the phone before his underboss could ask another question. He sat there for a long time, his hand resting on the receiver. He told himself it was practical. The weather was dangerous. He was merely waiting it out. But deep down, he knew he was lying. He wanted to see what would happen if he stayed. When he emerged from the study an hour later, the atmosphere in the great room had shifted from domestic bliss to cabin fever. Leo was staring out the window with a profound sense of boredom. Elena was trying to engage Sophie in a game of I Spy, but the only things to spy were snow and expensive furniture. "Do you know how to play chess?" Dario asked. Leo jumped, turning around. "No. Checkers." "Yeah, but we don't have a board." Dario walked to a cabinet near the fireplace and pulled out a hand-carved wooden box. He set it on the low coffee table. "This board is for both. Come." Elena watched from the sofa, a book resting forgotten in her lap. She watched the mafia boss, the man who wore three-piece suits on a Saturday, sit on the floor with her son. Dario was patient. That was a surprise. She had expected him to be arrogant or dismissive, but as he explained the rules of the game to Leo, his voice was level and calm. He didn't let the boy win, but he showed him why he lost. "You're thinking about your next move," Dario said, capturing one of Leo's pieces. "You need to think about my next move. Look at the whole board, not just your corner of it." "That's hard," Leo frowned. "Life is hard," Dario said simply. "Smart men make it easier by paying attention." Elena felt a lump form in her throat. It was such a masculine, fatherly thing to say. Mark had never played games with Leo. Mark had only yelled when Leo made too much noise. Later that afternoon, the boredom struck again. Elena mentioned she was worried about the van sitting out in the cold with a dead battery. "The garage is heated," Dario said. "We can push it inside. I have tools." "You know how to fix cars?" Elena asked. Surprised, Dario gave her a rare, faint smile. "I grew up in a neighborhood where if you couldn't fix an engine, you walked. I prefer not to walk." Getting the van into the massive four-car garage took all three of them pushing, slipping on the ice, their breath puffing in the freezing air. When they finally got it inside, they were all laughing, flushed and breathless. For the next 2 hours, Dario and Elena worked side by side under the hood of the old minivan. He rolled up the sleeves of his sweater, revealing forearms that were corded with muscle and marked by faint, white scars. Elena tried not to stare, but it was difficult. He handled the wrench with a surgeon's precision. "Alternator is shot," Dario diagnosed, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "And the battery is dead. I have a charger, but the alternator needs replacing." "Great," Elena sighed, leaning her hip against the fender. "More money I don't have." "I can order the part," Dario said, not looking at her. "Enzo can install it when the road's clear." "Dario, I can't pay you back for all this," she said, her voice tight. "The room, the food, the car parts. I am not a charity case." He stopped wiping his hands and looked at her. The garage lights were bright, harsh, leaving no shadows to hide in. "I know you are not," he said. "You are a mother protecting her cubs." "That is the most respectable job on the planet. Let me help. Please." The please was soft, almost a vulnerability in itself. Elena looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the tiredness around his eyes, the loneliness that seemed to cling to him despite his wealth. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you." Night fell quickly in the mountains. By 5 in the evening, the world outside was pitch black, the wind howling like a wounded animal. After a dinner of grilled cheese sandwiches, which Dario ate with a knife and fork, much to Leo's amusement, the children fell asleep on the oversized rugs in front of the fire. Elena carried them one by one to the guest room, tucking them in with a tenderness that made Dario's chest ache again. When she returned to the great room, the fire was roaring. Dario was pouring 2 glasses of red wine. He handed one to her as she sat down, not in the armchair this time, but on the sofa. He sat on the other end, a respectful distance between them, but close enough that she could smell the scent of motor oil and expensive cologne. "They seem happy here," Dario said, looking into the fire. "They feel safe." Elena replied. She took a large sip of wine. "Kids know. They have a radar for tension at home, at our old house. They walked on eggshells. Here, they are breathing. And you?" Dario turned his head to look at her. "Are you breathing? Elena?" She looked down at her glass, swirling the dark liquid. "I am trying, but every time the wind rattles a window, I think it is him." "Tell me," Dario said. It wasn't a request. Elena took a deep breath. She needed to say it. She needed someone to know. "His name is Mark," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "We were together for 6 years. He was charming. First, he had a temper. It started with punching walls, then breaking things, then me." She subconsciously touched her rib cage. Dario's eyes tracked the movement, his gaze darkening. "He got involved with a loan shark in the city," she continued. "Owed a lot of money. He started drinking to handle the stress, and he took it out on us. Last week, he came home with a gun. He said it was for protection, but he kept leaving it on the kitchen table. He kept looking at me and saying it would be so easy to just start over." Dario's hand tightened around his glass until his knuckles turned white. A cold, lethal rage coiled in his gut. He knew men like Mark. He killed men like Mark. "I waited until he passed out," Elena whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I packed the bags in 10 minutes. I didn't even say goodbye to the house. I just ran." "He is hunting you," Dario stated. "He texted me," she said, her voice trembling. "Before my phone died, he said I couldn't hide. He said I belonged to him." "You belong to no one," Dario said. His voice was low, guttural. It was the voice of the dawn, the voice that ordered executions. Elena looked up, startled by the intensity of his tone. She saw the darkness in him then, the violence he kept leashed beneath the bespoke suits and the polite manners. "You're not just an investor, are you?" she asked softly. Dario held her gaze. He could lie. He should lie. But looking at her stripped, raw honesty, he couldn't bring himself to do it. "No," he said. "I am not." "Are you a bad man, Dario?" He paused. "I have done bad things. I have done necessary things. Most people would run from me if they knew the truth." Elena studied his face. She looked at the sharp lines of his jaw, the darkness in his eyes, and the hands that had gently shown her son how to checkmate a king. "I'm not running," she said. "I don't know why, but I feel safe with you, safer than I have felt in years." The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and heavy. Dario felt a crack form in the wall he had built around his soul. He set his glass down on the table with a sharp clink. He needed to distance himself. He needed to leave the room, but he didn't. "Elena," he said, his voice a warning. "I know," she whispered. She shifted on the sofa, closing the distance between them. She didn't seem to be in control of her own body. She was drawn to him, to the power and the unexpected safety he offered. She leaned in. Dario watched her approach. He could stop this. He could stand up and walk away. But his body betrayed him. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of desire. When she was inches away, she hesitated, her eyes searching for him. The firelight danced in her irises, turning them to liquid gold. Dario raised his hand slowly. He cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing against the soft skin beneath her eye. His hand was large, rough, capable of terrible violence, yet now it held her as if she were made of glass. "You should not be safe with me," he murmured. "Let me decide that." She breathed. She closed the gap. The kiss was not like the storms outside. It was slow. It was a question asked and answered in the same breath. Her lips were soft, trembling slightly. His were firm, tasting of wine and restraint. Dario groaned low in his throat. He tilted his head, deepening the kiss, testing the waters. She responded instantly, her hand coming up to grip the front of his sweater, pulling him closer. The heat flared between them, sudden and consuming. For a moment, the world narrowed down to the friction of their lips and the heat of the fire. Then, sanity returned. Dario pulled back. It took every ounce of his willpower. Then he was breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers. "No," he said, his voice rasping. "No, I cannot do this. You are vulnerable. You are scared. I will not take advantage of that." Elena blinked, her eyes hazy with passion. She pulled back slightly, her hand falling from his chest. I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry." "Do not apologize," Dario said firmly. He looked at her. his eyes burning with an intensity that made her shiver. "Never apologize for this. I should go to bed," she whispered. "Before I do it again." "Yes," Dario agreed. "Go." She stood up on shaky legs. She looked at him one last time, a look full of confusion and longing, and then turned and fled toward the hallway. Dario remained on the sofa. He listened to her door click shut. He stood up and walked to the large window that overlooked the frozen forest. He pulled a silver case from his pocket and lit a cigarette, his hands trembling slightly. He inhaled deeply, the smoke filling his lungs, grounding him. He stared at his reflection in the dark glass. He saw a man who had spent his life building a fortress of solitude and power, and he saw a man who was ready to burn it all down for the woman sleeping down the hall. "What the hell are you doing, Moretti?" he asked the reflection. The reflection didn't answer, but the storm outside raged on, trapping them together, and Dario knew, with a sinking feeling of inevitability, that this was far from over. The storm did not just persist, it evolved. What had begun as a heavy snowfall had turned into a whiteout, a howling vortex that erased the horizon and buried the world in silence. The road leading down from the lodge was gone, replaced by a seamless drift of white that reached halfway up the trunks of the ancient pines. Inside the lodge, the air was thick with a different kind of tension. It started with a cough. Sophie, the 4-year-old, woke up from her nap with cheeks flushed a violent, unhealthy red. When Elena touched her forehead, the heat radiating from the small child was terrifying. "She is burning up," Elena whispered, her voice pitching up in panic. She fumbled for the thermometer in her bag, her hands shaking. "Leo, honey, go get me a damp cloth." Leo, looking pale and lethargic himself, slid off the couch. "I don't feel good either. Mom." Dario entered the room just as Elena read the digital display. 103 degrees. "What is it?" Dario asked, his voice sharp, cutting through her rising hysteria. "It's a fever," Elena said, clutching Sophie to her chest. The little girl whimpered, her eyes glassy and unfocused. "A high one, and I don't have any children's medicine. I used the last of it 2 days ago on the road. I didn't think we would be stuck." Dario moved to them instantly. He placed the back of his hand against Sophie's cheek, then Leo's forehead. His expression darkened. "I have a first aid kit, but nothing for pediatric fevers," he said. He walked to the window, staring out at the wall of white. "I need to get them to a doctor," Elena said, standing up, though she knew the sentence was irrational before she finished it. "No ambulance can get up this mountain right now," Dario said, turning back to her. "And your van will not make it 10 feet out of the garage. So what do I do?" Elena's voice cracked. "I can't just let them burn up. Dario, Sophie has a history of febrile seizures. If it gets too high..." Dario looked at the terror in her eyes. He saw the mother who had fled a violent man, who had slept in a freezing car, who had held it together with duct tape and willpower. She was about to break. "Stay with them," Dario ordered. He strode toward the foyer, grabbing his heavy wool coat and leather gloves. "Where are you going?" Elena cried, following him with Sophie in her arms. "There is a pharmacy in the town at the base of the mountain. It is 6 miles away." "You can't go out there," she argued, gesturing to the windows where the wind was rattling the panes. "It's a blizzard. Dario, you could drive off the road. You could freeze." Dario stopped with his hand on the heavy iron handle of the front door. He turned to look at her. "I have driven through worse things than snow. Elena, keep them cool. I will be back in an hour. Dario, please." 1 hour, he repeated. And then he stepped out into the howling void, the door slamming shut against the wind, sealing her inside. The next 60 minutes were the longest of Elena's life. She sat on the rug in front of the fire, stripping the kids down to their underclothes, wiping their hot skin with cool washcloths. She sang to them, quiet, trembling lullabies, while her eyes kept darting to the window, outside. There was nothing but white and the screaming wind. Her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. She imagined his black SUV sliding off a cliff. She imagined him buried in a drift, freezing to death because he was trying to save her children. The guilt churned in her stomach. mixing with the fear. 50 minutes passed, then 55. Then, a pair of headlights cut through the swirling snow like twin blades. Elena let out a sob of relief. She watched as the massive vehicle crawled up the driveway, pushing through 3 feet of fresh powder, fighting for every inch of traction. When it finally stopped in front of the garage, she didn't wait. She ran to the front door, throwing it open just as Dario came up the stone steps. He looked like a creature of the winter. Snow was plastered to his dark hair, his eyebrows, the shoulders of his coat. His face was pale from the biting cold, his lips slightly blue. But in his hand, gripped tightly in a plastic bag, were 3 boxes of medicine. "Get inside," he rasped, pushing her back into the warmth of the foyer and kicking the door shut behind him. "You're frozen," Elena gasped. She took the bag from him, her fingers brushing his ice-cold hand. "Dario, you're shaking. Give them the medicine," he commanded, his teeth chattering slightly. "I am fine." Elena ran to the kids. She dosed them quickly, the relief making her hands steady again. Within 20 minutes, the medicine began to work. Sophie's breathing deepened into sleep, and Leo curled up with a blanket, his eyes closing. Only then did Elena turn her attention back to the man standing by the fireplace. Dario had shed his coat and boots, but he was still wearing his sweater and trousers, both damp from the melted snow. He stood close to the flames, one hand braced on the mantel. His head bowed. He was shivering, a deep, tremors-in-the-bone kind of shivering. "You need to get those wet clothes off," Elena said. Her voice was soft, but it held a new authority. She disappeared into the bathroom and returned with a stack of thick, warm towels. Dario hadn't moved. She walked up to him, invading his personal space without hesitation. "Dario," she said. He looked at her. His dark eyes were heavy, guarded, but the cold had stripped away some of his armor. "They are sleeping?" "Yes, because of you." She reached out and took the hem of his sweater. "Arms up." He hesitated, then obeyed. She pulled the damp wool over his head, revealing a white undershirt that clung to his skin. She peeled that off, too. Dario stood bare-chested in the firelight. His body was a map of violence, hard muscle marred by silver scars. There was a jagged line on his ribs, a circular pucker on his shoulder that looked like an old bullet wound. But Elena didn't flinch. She didn't see a criminal. She saw the man who had driven through a blizzard for a little girl he barely knew. She draped a warm towel over his shoulders and began to rub his arms, creating friction, creating heat. "You could have died out there," she whispered, moving the towel down his back. "I told you," Dario said, his voice rougher than usual. "I do not die easily." Elena moved around to face him. She took another towel and began to dry his hair, her movements gentle, rhythmic. She dried his face, dabbing the melting snow from his eyelashes, his jaw. Her hands lingered. She dropped the towel. Her palms rested against his chest, right over his heart. She could feel it beating, heavy, steady, powerful. The heat from the fire wrapped around them, but the heat radiating between their bodies was hotter. "Why did you do it?" she asked. Looking up at him, Dario looked down. The distance between them had vanished. He could smell her scent, vanilla and anxiety. He could feel the ghost of her touch on his skin, even where her hands weren't. "Because they are yours," he said. The admission hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Elena's breath hitched. She looked at his mouth. Then she looked at his eyes. The restraint she had seen there for 2 days, the wall he kept between them, was crumbling. In its place was something raw, something starving. "Dario," she breathed. It was an invitation. He didn't hesitate this time. He reached out, his hands gripping her waist, pulling her flush against him. The contact was electric. Elena gasped, her hands sliding up his chest to wrap around his neck. "Tell me to stop," Dario growled, his forehead resting against hers. "Tell me to stop. Elena, because I cannot do it myself." "Don't stop," she whispered. "Please don't stop." He kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss the night before. That had been a question. This was an answer. It was fierce, possessed, filled with the pent-up adrenaline of the storm and the fear of the last few hours. His mouth took hers with a hunger that stole her breath. She met him measure for measure, her fingers tangling in his damp hair, pulling him closer. The room spun. Dario swept her up into his arms, her legs instinctively wrapping around his waist. He carried her not to the bedroom, but to the thick fur rug in front of the fireplace, lowering her down as if she were precious, breakable. But she didn't feel breakable. She felt alive. Clothes were discarded in a frenzy of need. The firelight painted their skin in gold and shadow. When they finally came together, it was a collision of two lonely souls finding an anchor. Dario moved over her, his weight grounding her, shielding her. He touched her with a reverence that made her chest ache. His hands mapped every curve, every scar she carried from her past, reclaiming her body as something to be worshipped, not hurt. "You are safe," he whispered against her skin, his voice a jagged vow. "You are safe here," Elena cried out, arching into him, the pleasure mixing with an emotional release so profound she felt like she was breaking apart and being put back together at the same time. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was feeling. She was wanted. They moved together with a rhythm that matched the storm outside, intense, unyielding, beautiful. When the end came, it left them both shattered and breathless, clinging to each other in the dim light. Dario rolled onto his side, pulling her against him. He wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her neck. He held her tightly, almost painfully, as if he were terrified that if he let go, she would dissolve into smoke. Elena lay there, listening to his heart slow down, feeling the solid weight of him. She closed her eyes and let herself think the dangerous thought she had been suppressing. This could be real. The next morning, the sun broke through. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried under 2 feet of pristine, glittering white. The sky was a piercing, brilliant blue. Inside the lodge, the awkwardness that usually follows a night of passion was absent. Instead, there was a quiet, humming connection. When Dario walked into the kitchen, he brushed his hand against the small of Elena's back as he passed. When she poured his coffee, she let her fingers linger on his wrist for a second longer than necessary. The glances they exchanged were heavy with shared knowledge. The fever had broken. Sophie and Leo were bouncing with energy, staring out the window at the winter wonderland. "Can we go out?" Leo asked, practically vibrating. "Please, the snow is huge." Dario set his coffee cup down. "You cannot go out in sneakers." Leo's face fell. "Oh, right. However," Dario continued, a glint of mischief in his dark eyes, "I believe the previous owner of this lodge had grandchildren, and I believe I saw some boxes in the mudroom." 10 minutes later, the kids were screaming with delight. Dario had produced high-quality snowsuits, boots, and gloves that, while slightly too big, were perfectly functional. But the real surprise was waiting in the garage. Dario walked out carrying 2 sleek, wooden sleds. "No way!" Leo yelled. For the next 2 hours, the terrifying mafia boss became a sled dog. He dragged the sleds up the hill behind the lodge, his boots crunching in the snow, his breath plumbing in the cold air. He pushed them down, watching them shriek with laughter. Elena watched from the porch, wrapped in a blanket. She watched Dario catch Sophie at the bottom of the hill, swinging her around until she was dizzy with giggles. She watched him high-five Leo. She saw the genuine smile on his face, a smile that reached his eyes, cracking the stone mask he wore for the world. He looked up and saw her watching. He stopped, standing knee-deep in the snow, backlit by the sun. He didn't wave. He just looked at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. For the first time, Elena didn't feel the urge to run. She looked at this man, this dangerous, complicated, powerful man, and she saw a future. She saw a protector. She saw a father figure. Maybe, she thought, her heart swelling. Maybe we don't have to leave. Maybe he can change. Maybe I can stay. Dario walked up the hill to her, breathing hard, his cheeks flushed. "Your children have too much energy," he said, though his tone was light. "They're happy," Elena said softly. "I haven't seen them this happy in a long time." "And you?" Dario asked, stepping onto the porch. He took her gloved hands in his. "Are you happy, Elena?" "I think I am," she whispered. Dario squeezed her hands. In his mind, the calculations were already running. He could move them to a safe house in the city. No, better, he could keep them here. He could run the business remotely. He could cut ties with the darker parts of the trade. He had enough money. He could buy legitimacy. He could buy a life where he could wake up to pancakes and snow days. "Stay," he said. "Stay here. With me." Elena opened her mouth to answer, to say yes, when the spell was shattered. A sharp, piercing ringtone cut through the crisp air. Dario stiffened. It was the satellite phone he kept in his coat pocket, the line reserved for emergencies only. He pulled his hands away from hers. The warmth vanished instantly. He pulled the phone out, his face hardening back into the mask of the dawn. "Moretti," he answered. Elena watched the transformation. The playful man in the snow was gone. The predator was back. He listened for a moment, his jaw tightening. He turned away from her, lowering his voice, but the air was so still she could hear every word. "Where?" Dario asked sharply. "Are you sure?" A pause. "No, do not engage yet. I want a description." Dario listened, and then his eyes flicked to Elena. There was a flash of something terrifying in them, not directed at her, but for her. "Understood," he said. "Lock down the perimeter. If he crosses the town line, I want to know." He hung up. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. The peace of the morning dissolved like sugar in hot water. "Who is it?" she whispered, though she already knew. The dread in her gut was a familiar, cold weight. Dario stepped toward her, reaching for her, but she took a step back. "Dario," she said, her voice trembling, "who is in town?" "A man was asking questions at the gas station in the village," Dario said, his voice flat, devoid of the joy from moments ago. "He was showing a picture of a woman and 2 children. He was driving a blue sedan." Elena choked on a sob. "It's Mark. Oh my God, he found us. How did he find us?" "It does not matter how," Dario said, his voice turning steely. "He is here." "I have to go," Elena said, panic seizing her chest. "I have to pack. We have to leave." "Elena, stop," Dario commanded. "You don't understand," she cried, backing away toward the door. "He's crazy. He'll hurt them. If he finds us here, he'll hurt you, too." She looked at the man she had slept with, the man she had started to trust, and she realized her mistake. She had brought danger to his doorstep. She had let herself pretend that a weekend in the snow could erase the reality of her life. "I have to go," she repeated, turning and running into the lodge. "Elena!" Dario shouted, but she was already halfway up the stairs, the dream of the morning shattering under the weight of the nightmare she couldn't outrun. The only sound in the guest suite was the rhythmic, shallow breathing of the children and the soft hiss of a zipper being pulled with trembling hands. Elena moved like a ghost in the dim light of the afternoon. Leo and Sophie were sprawled across the king-sized bed, exhausted from the morning in the snow, their cheeks still flushed with a healthy pink that Elena knew was temporary. The illusion of safety was gone. The bubble had popped the moment Dario's phone rang on the porch. She shoved a pile of fleece sweaters into her duffel bag, not bothering to fold them. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Every instinct she possessed was screaming one word: run! She reached for Leo's backpack, her fingers shaking so badly she knocked a glass of water off the nightstand. It never hit the floor. A large, scarred hand caught the glass mid-air, inches from the carpet. Elena gasped, spinning around. She hadn't heard the door open. She hadn't heard footsteps. But Dario was there, filling the doorway, his presence sucking the oxygen out of the room. He set the glass back on the table with a deliberate, silent click. "You are packing," he said. It was not a question. His voice was devoid of the warmth she had heard on the snowy hill. It was flat, cold, and terrifyingly calm. "I have to," Elena whispered, stepping back until her legs hit the edge of the mattress. "Please, Dario, move." "You have nowhere to go," Dario said, crossing his arms over his chest. The heavy wool of his sweater strained against his muscles. "The roads are still treacherous. You have no money. You have a van that I have not finished repairing, and you have a man hunting you. That is exactly why I have to go." Elena kept her voice low, desperate not to wake the children. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and stinging. "You don't understand. Mark isn't just some angry ex-boyfriend. He's unstable. He has a gun. If he finds us here, he won't just hurt me. He'll hurt you. He'll burn this whole place down." She grabbed the handle of her bag, trying to shoulder past him. "I won't let that happen. I won't bring that darkness to your door." Dario didn't move. He didn't even blink. When she tried to push past him, he simply caught her upper arm. His grip was firm, unbreakable, stopping her in her tracks. "Elena, look at me! Let me go," she hissed, struggling against his hold. "You are a businessman, Dario. You invest in shipping. You don't know what violence looks like when it kicks down your door at 3 a.m. Dario laughed. It was a dark, humorless sound that sent a shiver down Elena's spine. He pulled her closer, forcing her to look up into his eyes. The hazel warmth she had fallen for was gone. In its place was a void, a deep, endless well of power and command. "You think I am an investor?" he asked softly. You said—" "I lied," Dario cut her off. "I do not invest in shipping. Elena, I control the ports. I do not buy real estate. I own the city block." Elena stopped struggling. Her breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that you are afraid of a dog who barks," Dario said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "But you are standing in the den of a wolf." He let go of her arm and stepped back, spreading his hands to encompass the room, the lodge, the life he lived. "My name is Dario Moretti. I am the head of the Moretti crime family. I control the syndicate that runs the entire eastern seaboard. Governors ask me for favors. Police commissioners lose sleep worrying about my mood." He took a step toward her, his eyes blazing. "You are worried your ex-boyfriend has a gun. Elena, I have an army. I have men who would walk into fire if I ordered it. I have killed men for looking at me with the wrong tone of voice. Mark is not a threat to me. Mark is an insect." Elena stared at him. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The pieces slammed together in her mind. The silent, efficient driver, the bodyguard who moved like a shadow, the scars on Dario's body, the absolute, unwavering authority he carried like a second skin. She should have been terrified. She was standing in a room with a mafia boss, a criminal, a man who died in death. You're a mobster," she whispered. "I am the boss," he corrected. Shock washed over her, followed by a surge of anger. "You lied to me. You let me bring my children into a house owned by a criminal. I let you bring your children into a fortress," Dario snapped, his calm cracking. "Look at me, Elena. Look at me and tell me you do not feel safe. She faltered. "Tell me," he demanded, stepping into her space again. "When you were with me by the fire, when we were in the snow, when you were in my arms, did you feel fear or did you feel protected?" Elena trembled. The truth was a knot in her chest. "I felt safe," she admitted, a tear slipping down her cheek. "That's the worst part. I felt safe because I knew, deep down, I knew you were dangerous. I just didn't want to admit it." "Then admit it now," Dario said. He reached out, his hand cupping the back of her neck, his thumb resting on the pulse that fluttered wildly in her throat. "I am a dangerous man, Elena. I have blood on my hands, but I swear to you, in my life and in the lives of everyone I command, no one touches what is mine." "I'm not yours," she breathed, though her body was already leaning into his touch. "Aren't you?" Dario murmured. His eyes dropped to her lips. "You came to my door. You slept in my bed. You let me hold you. You are mine, Elena, and I protect what is mine." "He will come," she said, the fear of Mark still a claw in her gut. "He won't stop. Let him come," Dario growled. "It will save me the trouble of hunting him down." They stared at each other, the air between them charged with a volatile mix of fear, anger, and undeniable attraction. Elena looked at the man who terrified her and the man who had saved her children, and realized they were the same person. And God help her, she wanted him. "This is madness," she whispered. "This is survival." He countered. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't the testing, sweet kiss of the first night, nor the tender passion of the blizzard. This was a claim. It was a desperate collision of two people standing on the edge of a cliff. Dario's arm wrapped around her waist, crushing her against him, lifting her off her feet. Elena clung to him, her fingers digging into his shoulders, her fear transmuting into a fierce, burning need. She needed his strength. She needed the darkness in him because it was the only thing strong enough to fight the darkness chasing her. They broke apart, gasping for air, foreheads resting against each other. "Stay," Dario commanded, his voice ragged. "One more night. Give me until morning to secure the perimeter. If you still want to leave, then I will have Enzo drive you anywhere you want, but do not run into the dark alone." Elena looked at the sleeping children. Then she looked at Dario, the monster who was promising to be her shield. "One night," she agreed. "Just one night." That night, the boundaries of the guest room dissolved. Dario did not leave her at the door. They lay together in the massive bed in the master suite, the only light coming from the dying embers in the fireplace. The storm outside had cleared, leaving a silence so profound it felt heavy. They didn't have sex. The energy between them was too raw, too fragile for that. Instead, they lay tangled in the heavy duvet, limbs intertwined. Dario lay on his back, one arm thrown over his eyes, the other wrapped firmly around Elena, who was curled against his side, her head on his chest. She traced the jagged scar on his ribs with her fingertip. "How did you get this?" she asked softly. "A disagreement in Boston," Dario said, his voice vibrating in his chest. 10 years ago. And this one," she touched a small, star-shaped scar on his shoulder. "A warning," he said, "from a man who learned that warnings do not work on me." Elena went quiet. "Do you ever regret it? Life?" Dario turned his head to look at her. The firelight caught the sharp angle of his cheekbone. "I did not have a choice. Elena, I was born into this. My father was the boss. His father was the boss. It is the only world I have ever known." He paused, his hand tightening on her arm. "But this morning," he continued, his voice lower, "watching you with the sleds, watching the boy laugh. For the first time in 40 years, I wondered what it would be like to be someone else." Elena's heart ached. She pressed a kiss to the skin over his heart. "You can be someone else. Dario, you're not just the title. We will see," he whispered. He pulled the blanket up over her shoulder. "Sleep. Elena, I'm awake. Nothing gets past me." Dawn arrived with a blinding brilliance, the sun reflecting off the millions of ice crystals that coated the forest. But the peace of the morning was shattered before Elena even opened her eyes. She woke to the sound of Dario's voice. He was standing by the window, fully dressed in dark tactical gear, black cargo pants, a fitted black sweater, and a holster strapped beneath his arm. He was speaking into his phone, his voice low and rapid. "When?" Dario asked. Elena sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. The sight of the gun holster sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. Dario hung up and turned to her. His face was grim. "What happened?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "My men in town," Dario said, walking over to the bed. He sat on the edge, his expression unreadable. "There was a break-in at the motel on the highway. The Sunrise Inn?" Elena gasped. "That's where Mark would stay. It's the cheapest place." "Someone kicked in the door of room 112, Dario said. "The manager says the man who was staying there is gone. He left in a hurry, and he stole a local map from the front desk." "He's coming," Elena whispered. The panic that had been simmering all night boiled over. She scrambled out of bed, her legs tangling in the sheets. "He's coming here. He knows. Oh, God, he knows. Elena, breathe," Dario said, standing up to catch her. "No, you don't know him." She pulled away, her eyes wild. "He's not just coming to talk. Dario, he's coming to kill me. He said he would. He said if I ever left, he would bury me." She was spiraling, her trauma taking the wheel. The room felt like it was shrinking. The sight of Dario's gun, which was supposed to make her feel safe, only reminded her of the violence she had fled. "I have to get the kids," she hyperventilated, rushing toward the door. "We have to hide. We have to—" "Elena!" Dario grabbed her shoulders, stopping her frantic movement. "Look out the window! No, I have to— Look out the window!" he commanded. He marched her to the glass. Elena looked down. Below, in the circular driveway and surrounding the perimeter of the lodge, were 5 black SUVs. Men in dark coats were stationed at intervals, standing still as statues. They were armed, they were professional. They were a wall of steel between her and the world. "My security team arrived 20 minutes ago," Dario said, his voice close to her ear. "There are 12 men on the grounds. 4 more are patrolling the access road. A fly could not enter this property without my permission." Elena stared at the small army. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. She collapsed. Her knees gave out, the sheer weight of the situation crushing her. Dario caught her instantly, lowering her to the floor, pulling her into his lap. She buried her face in his chest and sobbed. Great. Heaving sobs that tore through her body. "I can't do this," she cried, clutching his sweater. "I can't live like this. The guns, the violence. It never ends. It just changes shape. It ends here," Dario whispered, rocking her gently. "I promise you, it ends here." "You don't understand," she wept. "I can't lose them. I can't lose Leo and Sophie. I can't—" She choked on the words, the secret she had kept buried deep inside finally clawing its way out. "I was pregnant," she gasped. Dario went still. His hand froze on her hair. 3 years ago," Elena sobbed, the words spilling out in a rush of pain. "I was pregnant. A girl. I wanted her so much. But Mark, he came home drunk. He was angry about money. He threw me against the wall. He didn't stop." Dario's grip on her tightened, his fingers digging into the fabric of her shirt. A cold, black rage began to fill him, darker and deeper than anything he had ever felt. "I lost her," Elena whispered, her voice breaking into a keen sorrow. "I lost the baby. He killed her. Dario. He killed my baby and he didn't even care. He blamed me for falling." She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears, her eyes pleading. "That's why I ran," she said. "Because when I saw him look at Leo with that same look, I knew. I knew he would kill them too. And I can't survive that again. I can't—" Dario Moretti closed his eyes. He felt the violence in his own blood, the heritage of brutality he carried. But looking at this broken woman, hearing the horror she had endured, that violence found a singular, razor-sharp focus. He opened his eyes. They were dry, hard, and absolutely merciless. He pulled her head back against his chest, wrapping his arms around her so tightly it was as if he were trying to merge their bodies into one. He wanted to absorb her pain. He wanted to take her fear and turn it into a weapon. "He will never touch you again," Dario said. His voice was a low rumble, vibrating against her ear. "He took a life from you. I swear to you, Elena, he will pay for that debt with everything he has." "Dario." "Hush," he commanded softly, kissing the top of her head. "You are safe. Leo is safe. Sophie is safe. Cry. Elena, let it out. But know that, while you cry, I am building a wall around you that death itself cannot cross." Elena wept until she had no tears left, held in the arms of a monster who had decided to become her guardian angel. And as the morning sun climbed higher, illuminating the snow, Dario stared out at the tree line, waiting. He was no longer just protecting a woman. He was avenging a ghost, and God helped the man who was driving up the mountain to meet him. The silence of the forest was broken not by the wind, but by the grinding of engines. Dario stood on the front porch, his breath visible in the frigid air. He wore no coat, only his tactical sweater and the shoulder holster that housed his weapon. He watched as 3 vehicles, a battered sedan and 2 dark trucks, slid precariously up the icy driveway, fishtailing in the fresh powder. Inside the lodge, the doors were locked. Elena and the children were in the basement media room, a windowless bunker of soundproofed concrete. Enzo was with them, armed and instructed not to open the door unless he heard Dario's specific code word. Dario lit a cigarette. His hands were steady. He took a drag, the cherry glowing bright against the gray afternoon light, and waited. The vehicles screeched to a halt near the garage. Doors flew open. Mark stepped out of the lead sedan. He looked exactly as Dario had pictured him, disheveled, frantic, with the bloated confidence of a man who had never faced a real predator. He was holding a handgun, waving it around with dangerous carelessness. Behind him, 5 men spilled out of the trucks. They were hired muscle, biker types in leather and denim, looking cold and unhappy about the mountain air. They carried baseball bats and tire irons. One had a shotgun. They were amateurs. "Elena!" Mark screamed, his voice cracking. He looked at the lodge, his eyes wild. "I know you're in there. Get your ass out here!" Dario flicked the cigarette butt over the railing. It landed in the snow with a soft hiss. "She is not here," Dario said. His voice was not loud, but it carried across the clearing with the weight of a gavel strike. Mark spun around. Seeing Dario for the first time, he sneered, aiming the gun shakily at the porch. "Who the hell are you? Where is my wife?" "She is not your wife," Dario corrected calmly. "She is the woman who left you. And I am the man telling you to turn around and leave before you make a mistake you cannot fix." "I'm not leaving without her," Mark shouted, taking a step forward. "Boys, get the door open." The men behind him surged forward. "Luca," Dario said softly. From the tree line flanking the driveway, 6 figures materialized like ghosts in white camouflage. They were Dario's elite guards, men trained in special forces and urban warfare. They raised assault rifles with practiced unison. The click of safety catches disengaging echoed through the clearing. Mark's men froze. They looked at the bats in their hands, then at the laser sights dancing on their chests. "Drop them," Dario ordered. 3 of the men dropped their weapons instantly, raising their hands, but Mark was desperate. Panic and ego were a volatile mix. "No," Mark yelled. "He's bluffing. There's only a few of them." Mark raised his gun and fired. The bullet shattered a window pane 3 feet to Dario's left. The air exploded. Dario moved with a fluidity that belied his size. He vaulted the porch railing, landing in the snow as Luca and the team opened fire. It wasn't a spray of bullets. It was controlled. Surgical shots. The snow around the trucks erupted in geysers of white. 2 of Mark's men went down, clutching their legs, screaming in pain. The others dove for cover behind the vehicles. Dario did not dive. He walked. He moved through the chaos with terrifying focus, his own weapon drawn. He fired twice, double taps that took out the tires of the sedan, trapping them. Mark was crouching behind the open door of his car, fumbling with his gun, trying to reload. He looked up, eyes wide with terror, to see Dario Moretti standing over him. Dario didn't shoot him. He kicked the car door shut. The metal slammed into Mark's shoulder, sending him sprawling into the snow with a cry of agony. His gun flew out of his hand. Before Mark could scramble away, Dario was on him. He grabbed Mark by the collar of his cheap jacket and hauled him up, slamming him against the hood of the car. "You came to my house," Dario snarled, his face inches from Mark's. "You fired a weapon near her children." I just want Elena," Mark stammered, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. "She's mine." "She is a human being," Dario roared, slamming him against the hood again. "She is not property." The firing had stopped. Luca and the team had the remaining thugs face down in the snow, zip-tied and silent. The 2 wounded men were groaning, attended to by one of Dario's medics. Dario pulled a small digital recorder from his pocket with his free hand. He pressed the button and held it to Mark's trembling lips. "Speak," Dario commanded. "Tell me what you did to her. Tell me about the baby." "I didn't. It was an accident." Dario pressed the barrel of his gun into Mark's kneecap. "Do not lie to me. I know everything. I know about the gambling debts. I know about the assault. Admit it, and I let you walk away in handcuffs. Lie to me, and you stay on this mountain forever." Mark broke. He sobbed, his bravado dissolving into pathetic whimpers. "I hit her. Okay, I hit her. I didn't mean to make her fall. The baby. I just wanted her to shut up. I didn't mean to kill it." "And the threat?" Dario prompted coldly. "What did you say you would do if she left?" "I said I'd kill her." Mark wept. "I said I'd find her and kill her." Dario clicked the recorder off. He holstered his gun and stepped back, looking at Mark with pure, unadulterated disgust. "Luca," Dario called out. "The police are 2 minutes out. Ensure the trash is collected." Luca nodded. The hired thugs, the ones who were merely foolish enough to take a paycheck, were hauled into the back of one of the trucks. One of Dario's men jumped in the driver's seat. They would be driven to the city limits and dumped with a severe warning. Mark was left alone, kneeling in the snow, bleeding and weeping. Sirens began to wail in the distance, echoing up the canyon. Dario turned and walked back toward the lodge. He didn't look back. Elena stood in the foyer. She had come up from the basement when the shooting stopped, despite Enzo's protests. She stared through the broken window, her hands covering her mouth. She'd seen it all. She watched the police cruisers skid up the driveway. She watched officers, who seemed to nod respectfully at Dario, handcuff Mark. She watched Mark get shoved into the back of a squad car, defeated and broken. Dario stood by the porch steps, speaking to a police sergeant. He handed over the recorder. He pointed to the broken window. He was calm, authoritative, controlling the narrative completely. When the police finally left, taking the nightmare of her past with them, silence reclaimed the mountain. Dario walked into the house. He closed the heavy oak door and locked it. He turned to face her. He looked dangerous. There was blood on his knuckles, not his own. His eyes were still dark with the adrenaline of the fight. He looked like a soldier returning from war, carrying the stench of violence on his skin. "It is done," he said. His voice was hoarse. He confessed, "The recording is with the police. He will be charged with assault, domestic terrorism, and possession of an illegal firearm. With my lawyers pushing the DA. He will not see daylight for 20 years. Elena stared at him. She should have been relieved. The monster was gone. She was free, but she was terrified. She swallowed hard. "You shot those men. I neutralized a threat," Dario said, walking past her toward the kitchen sink. He turned on the faucet and began to scrub his hands, watching the red-tinted water swirl down the drain. It was a war zone. "Dario!" Elena's voice rose, trembling. "There were people with machine guns in the trees. You broke his arm like it was a twig." Dario turned off the water and dried his hands on a towel. He turned to her, his expression weary. "I used the necessary force to protect you. Would you have preferred I let him kick down the door?" "No," she whispered. "But is this it? Is this your life? Just violence and power and making people disappear?" Dario leaned back against the counter. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him hollow. "This is the world I live in, Elena. It is a world where the strong survive and the weak are eaten. Today, I was the strong one. And tomorrow?" she asked, stepping closer. "What happens when someone comes for you? What happens when Leo is playing in the yard and it's not Mark coming up the driveway, but one of your enemies?" Dario flinched. The question struck him harder than a bullet. "I would protect them," he vowed. "You can't protect everyone from everything," she said, tears filling her eyes. "Dario, I ran away to escape violence. I didn't run away just to find a different version of it." Dario looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the fear warring with the love in her eyes. He saw the woman who had made him feel human for 3 days, and he realized with a crushing weight that he was about to lose her. "I don't want this life either," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Not anymore. Before you. It was just business. Now, it feels like a cage." "Then leave it," she pleaded. "It is not that simple," he said sadly. "You cannot just walk away from the syndicate. It takes time. It takes maneuvering. And until then, I am a target." Elena closed her eyes. A single tear tracking through the dust on her cheek. "I can't live like that. I can't raise them waiting for the next gunfight." "I know," Dario said. The silence between them was thick with grief. They both knew what had to happen. The fairy tale was over. Reality had kicked down the door. That night, the lodge felt different. It wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was a waiting room for a goodbye. The children were asleep, blissfully unaware that their boogeyman had been locked away. Elena and Dario were in the master bedroom, the fire burning low. They didn't speak. There were no words left to say. When Dario reached for her, it wasn't with the possessive demand of the previous days. It was with a desperate, aching tenderness. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in the curve of her neck, breathing her in as if he were trying to memorize her scent. Elena clung to him. She ran her hands over his back, tracing the topography of his scars, feeling the hard ridges of muscle that had shielded her from the world. She kissed the pulse point at his throat, tasting the salt of his skin. "Make me forget," she whispered against his lips. "Just for tonight. Make me forget everything but you." Dario kissed her. It was a slow, deep kiss that tasted of sorrow and longing. They made love with a raw, heartbreaking intensity. It wasn't about pleasure, though that was there. It was about connection. It was about saying everything they couldn't say in words. Every touch was a thank you. Every kiss was an apology. Dario moved over her, looking down into her eyes, his own dark gaze unguarded and vulnerable. He worshipped her body, kissing every inch of her, treating her like something sacred that he was forced to return to the altar. "You are the only good thing I have ever touched," he rasped, his forehead resting against hers. "You are a good man, Dario," she whispered back, holding his face in her hands. Somewhere deep down, under all the armor, "You are a good man. Only with you," he said. "Only with you." They fell asleep tangled together, limbs heavy and intertwined, holding on until the very last second of the night slipped away. Morning came too fast. It was gray and cold, the sky reflecting the mood inside the lodge. Elena packed the last of the bags. Enzo had the SUV running in the driveway, the engine humming a low, mournful note. Dario stood in the foyer. He was back in his suit, the armor of the dawn. He looked impeccable, untouchable, and utterly alone. Elena walked down the stairs, holding Sophie's hand, with Leo trailing behind with his backpack. "The car is ready," Dario said. He didn't move toward them. He stayed by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. "Where will you go?" he asked. "My sister in Ohio," Elena said. "She has a guest room. I can start there. With Mark in jail, I don't have to hide anymore." "Enzo has an envelope for you," Dario said stiffly. "Do not argue. It is enough to get you set up. An apartment, a car, school for the children." "Dario, I can't take it," he interrupted, his voice cracking slightly. "Please, let me do that much." Elena nodded, biting her lip to stop the tears. Leo stepped forward. He looked at the tall, imposing man in the suit. "Are you coming with us?" Dario looked down at the boy. He crouched, balancing on the balls of his feet so he was eye level with the child. "No, Leo, I have work to do here." "But you fixed our car," Leo said, "and you played sleds." "I did," Dario said. He reached out and squeezed the boy's shoulder. "You take care of your mother and sister. You are the man of the house now. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," Leo said solemnly. Dario stood up. He looked at Elena. She walked over to him. She stopped a foot away, the space between them filled with all the things that made them impossible. "I need time," she said softly. "I need to figure out who I am when I'm not running, and I need to know if there is a version of you that exists without the gun." Dario reached into his inside pocket. He pulled out a small, plain white card. On it was a single phone number, handwritten in black ink. "This is my private line," he said, pressing it into her hand. "No one else has it. If you ever need anything at all, you call. If you decide that you can accept the man I am, or if I manage to become the man you need, call." Elena's fingers closed around the card. She looked up at him, her eyes swimming. "Goodbye, Dario." "Go," he whispered, "before I beg you to stay." She turned and walked out the door. Dario watched them go. He watched the children climb into the back seat. He watched Elena look back at the house one last time before getting in. The heavy door closed with a final click. Dario Moretti stood in the silence of his empty lodge. He listened to the sound of the SUV driving away, carrying the only light he had ever known down the mountain and out of his life. He walked to the window and watched the taillights disappear into the trees. "Goodbye, Elena," he said to the empty room. Then he turned around, picked up his phone, and dialed a number. "It is Moretti," he said, his voice cold and hard as iron. "Call the consigliere. We need to restructure. I want to sell the shipment routes." He paused, looking at the empty space on the rug where they had made love. "I am getting out." 6 weeks had passed since the black SUV disappeared down the winding mountain road, taking the only warmth Dario Moretti had ever known with it. In a quiet suburb of Ohio, autumn had arrived in a blaze of orange and red. Elena stood at the kitchen window of the small, tidy bungalow she had rented, watching the dead leaves swirl across the lawn. The envelope Dario had given her, a thick packet of cash and bank routing numbers, had been more than enough to start over. She had a reliable car. The rent was paid for a year. Leo and Sophie were enrolled in the local elementary school, their laughter slowly returning as the shadow of their father faded into the past. It was the life she had prayed for. It was safe. It was predictable. It was quiet. And it was suffocatingly lonely. Elena turned away from the window and wiped her hands on a dish towel. The house was silent. The kids were at school, and the job she had found at a local library didn't start until noon. She had hours to fill, and every single second was filled with thoughts of him. She saw him in the dark coffee of her morning cup. She felt the phantom weight of his hand on her back when she walked through the grocery store. At night, the silence of the bedroom was deafening, a constant reminder of the night they had spent tangled together, shielding each other from the world. She told herself she was doing the right thing. She told herself that men like Dario Moretti were a storm, and you didn't build a house inside a storm. You survived it, and then you rebuilt in the calm. But the calm felt like a grave. 300 miles away, in the penthouse office of the Moretti Syndicate headquarters. The air was conditioned, filtered, and stale. Dario stood looking out over the gray skyline of the city. He was wearing a $3,000 suit. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. Behind him, his new consigliere was reading a report on the quarter's earnings. "The shipment from heavy machinery has cleared customs," the man was saying. "Profits are up 12%, and the unions are playing ball." Dario didn't turn around. "Good, sir, regarding the territory dispute in the South District." "Crush it," Dario said, his voice flat. "Send Luca. Make it clear." "Yes, boss." The door clicked shut, leaving him alone. Dario walked to his desk and poured a glass of whiskey. It was barely 11 in the morning. He didn't drink it. He just stared at the amber liquid, watching the light fracture through the crystal. His empire was secure. His enemies were quiet. He had everything a man in his position was supposed to want, and yet he felt like he was haunting his own life. He had tried to stay away. God knew he had tried. 2 weeks ago, he drove to Ohio. He had told himself it was just a security check, a way to ensure Mark's associates hadn't tried anything. He had parked his rental car down the street from the school. He had watched Elena walk out the double doors, holding Sophie's hand. She looked tired. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of a heavy coat. She looked beautiful. Leo had been running ahead, kicking a soccer ball. Dario's hand had been on the door handle. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to get out, to cross the street, to pick her up and never let go. But then he looked at his reflection in the side mirror. He saw the hard eyes, the scar on his jaw, the darkness that clung to him like a second skin. "You are the danger," he had told himself. "Let them have the light." He had started the car and driven away without looking back. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday evening. Elena was cooking dinner, spaghetti, because it was Leo's favorite. The rain was drumming a relentless rhythm against the roof, a sound that reminded her too vividly of the storm at the lodge. Leo was sitting at the kitchen table, rummaging through his backpack for his homework folder. He dumped the contents out: a crushed juice box, 3 pencils, a crumpled drawing of a dinosaur, and a small, pristine white card. Elena froze. She was stirring the sauce, but her hand stopped moving. Leo picked up the card. He turned it over in his small hands. "Mom? Yes, baby?" Elena asked, her voice tight. Do you miss him? Elena turned around slowly. Miss who? Dario, Leo said. He looked up at her with innocent, devastating honesty. The man who played in the snow with us. The man who fixed the van. Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Leo, he helped us when we were stuck. He was nice, Leo said, looking back at the card. He didn't yell. And he made you laugh. You never laugh like that anymore. The spoon clattered from Elena's hand onto the stove. The truth, spoken so simply by a 7-year-old boy, shattered the fragile wall she had built around her heart. She walked over to the table and sank into the chair beside him. She took the card from his hand. It was warm from his touch. Dario Moretti. And the number. I miss him too, Elena whispered. The tears came then, sudden and hot. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing in her kitchen while her son patted her back, just like he had in the parking garage all those weeks ago. It was midnight. The rain had turned into a deluge, hammering against the world. The kids were asleep. The house was dark. Elena sat on the living room floor, her back against the sofa. Her phone was in her hand. She had dialed the number 3 times and hung up before pressing the call. He let you go, a voice in her head whispered. He chose the business. He gave you a choice. Her heart argued back, and you chose fear. She took a deep breath, her fingers trembling, and pressed the green button. It rang once, twice. Moretti, the sound of his voice, deep, rough, familiar, sent a shockwave through her body. It was like oxygen after holding her breath for 6 weeks. Elena opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her throat closed up. She sat there, clutching the phone, breathing shakily into the receiver. Silence stretched across the line. He didn't hang up. He didn't ask who it was. Elena, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. It was a caress. She let out a choked sob. Dario, are you safe? He asked instantly, the protector in him snapping to attention. Yes, she whispered. I'm safe, but I'm not okay. Tell me what you need, he said. The intensity in his voice traveled through the miles of wire and rain. Name it, and it is yours. I don't want money, she cried softly. I don't want safety. She couldn't say it. It was too terrifying. I'm coming, Dario said. Dario, you're 300 miles away. I am coming, he repeated. Lock the door. Wait for me. The line went dead. 4 hours later, headlights swept across the living room wall. Elena had not moved. She was still sitting on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, watching the rain slash against the window. She heard the car door slam, a heavy, decisive sound. She scrambled to her feet. She ran to the door, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She unlocked the deadbolt and threw it open. Dario was standing on the porch. He was soaked to the bone. His suit jacket was gone. His white shirt plastered to his chest, translucent with rain. His hair was plastered to his forehead, water dripping from his nose and chin. He looked wild. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had driven through hell to get to her. They stared at each other for a heartbeat, the rain creating a curtain of noise around them. You came, she breathed. You called, he said simply. Elena didn't wait. She stepped out onto the porch, barefoot on the cold concrete, and threw herself at him. Dario caught her. He groaned, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief, and wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off her feet. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of her, the reality of her. Elena, he murmured against her skin. God, Elena. She pulled back just enough to find his mouth. The kiss was desperate. It was fierce. It was an apology and a promise and a claim all at once. His lips were cold from the rain, but his mouth was hot, demanding. She tasted the rain on his skin and the longing that had been eating him alive. He kicked the door shut behind them, shutting out the storm. He didn't put her down. He carried her through the dark living room, down the hallway, moving by instinct. I tried, he rasped, kissing her jaw, her throat. I tried to stay away. I thought I was protecting you. I don't want protection if it means being without you, she whispered, gripping his wet shirt. I tried too. It's empty. Dario, It's just gray." He carried her into her bedroom and lowered her onto the bed. He stood over her, dripping wet, his chest heaving. "If I touch you now," he warned, his voice ragged, "I will never let you go again. Understand that?" "There is no walking away after this." "Don't let go," she said, reaching up for him. "Never let go." Dario stripped off his wet shirt and joined her. When they came together, it wasn't like the first time in the lodge, which had been shadowed by grief and fear. This was an affirmation. It was raw and real. There were no secrets left between them. He kissed her like he was starving. Every touch was heavy with possession. He mapped her body with his hands, reclaiming the places he had tried to forget. Elena met him with equal force, her nails digging into his shoulders, grounding him, telling him without words that she was here. She was real. She was his. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness, the truth finally free. Dario froze. He rested his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. "I have loved you since the moment you looked at me in that parking garage," he confessed, his voice breaking. "I just didn't know what to call it." Later, the rain had slowed to a gentle patter. They lay tangled in the sheets, the room illuminated by the street lamp outside. Dario was tracing the line of her spine with his hand. It felt peaceful. It was a sensation so foreign to him that he almost didn't recognize it. "I want to be with you," Elena said softly, breaking the silence. I want you to know Leo and Sophie. I want to wake up next to you." Dario kissed her shoulder. "That is all I want." "But," Elena said, turning in his arms to face him. Her expression was serious. "I meant what I said. Dario, I can't live with the violence. I can't have guns in the house. I can't wonder if you're coming home or if the police are coming to tell me you're dead." Dario looked at her. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You think I've been sitting in my office counting money these last 6 weeks?" he asked gently. "What do you mean?" "I told you I was getting out," Dario said. "I meant it." "But you said it takes time. I have accelerated the timeline," he said. A faint, grim smile touched his lips. "It has been an expensive month. I sold the shipping routes that carried the contraband. I sold the gambling debts to a rival family in Chicago. I liquidated the assets that were tied to the street operations." Elena's eyes widened. "You did that? For me?" "I did it for me," he corrected, "because I realized that being the king of the underworld meant nothing if I had to rule it alone. I have kept the logistics company, the real estate holdings, the legal investments. It is still an empire. Elena, but it is clean, or as clean as it can be. And the enemies?" she asked, fear still lingering in her eyes. "They are happy," Dario said. "I gave them territory. I gave them profit. They have no reason to come for a retired man who just wants to run a shipping logistics firm." He took her hand and kissed her knuckles. "I am done with the blood. Elena, I traded it for you." Elena let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for a lifetime. She pulled him close, resting her head on his chest, right over the beat of his heart. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." 6 months later, the snow had returned, but this time, it wasn't a storm. It was a gentle, drifting powder that coated the large backyard of the Victorian house on the edge of the city. Laughter rang out in the crisp air. Leo was sprinting across the lawn, pursued by a golden retriever puppy that was tripping over its own paws. Sophie was sitting on a sled, shouting commands at Enzo, who was happily pulling her in circles, looking less like a bodyguard and more like a tired uncle. Dario stood in the doorway of the sunroom, a mug of coffee in his hand. He was wearing a thick wool sweater and jeans, no holster, no tactical gear. He watched the scene with a quiet sense of wonder that hadn't faded. He felt arms wrap around his waist from behind. He leaned back into the embrace. "They are going to wear the dog out before noon," Elena said, resting her chin on his shoulder. "Better the dog than me," Dario chuckled. He turned in her arms, setting his coffee down on the table. He looked down at her. Her face was full of color, her eyes bright. She looked happy. "You look beautiful," he said. "I look tired," she laughed. "Sophie had a nightmare last night." "I know," Dario said. I heard you go to her. You are a good mother, Elena. We are good parents, she corrected him softly. Dario swallowed the lump in his throat. He looked out at the yard, at Leo, who was waving at him, at the life he had chosen. He thought about the power he had given up, the fear he used to command. It felt like dust compared to this. He wrapped his arms around Elena, pulling her tight against him, shielding her from the cold draft of the door. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For what?" "For crying in that parking garage," he said. "For saving me," Elena smiled, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him. "We saved each other, Dario." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in white, a blank page ready for the story they would write together, safe, loved, and free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Dario and Elena as much as I enjoyed writing it for you. It is a story about second chances, the power of love to heal old wounds, and the bravery it takes to choose a new life. Please let me know in the comments down below where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories and hitting that like button. Share your thoughts in English in the comments. Did you like Dario's transformation? Would you have forgiven him? I can't wait to read your opinions. Until next time, stay safe and keep believing in love.